If you can start it, it's yours." Marcus Wellington's voice dripped with contempt as he gestured toward the mangled wreckage of what had once been a pristine silver Porsche 911 GT3, now nothing more than a twisted monument to destruction sitting in the corner of his luxury automotive showroom. The words hung in the air like poison, meant to sting, meant to humiliate, meant to remind everyone present exactly where they stood in his carefully constructed hierarchy of worth and value. Thomas Reed, 68 years old with silver gray hair and hands that bore the calluses of a lifetime of honest work, had only stopped by Wellington Premium Automotive to deliver lunch to his daughter Maya, who worked in the accounting department on the second floor of the gleaming glass building. But when his 20-year-old Chevrolet sedan sputtered and died right there in the circular driveway, directly in front of the main entrance where Wellington happened to be entertaining a group of wealthy clients, the real estate mogul saw an opportunity too delicious to resist. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a real-life mechanic right here," Wellington announced loudly, his voice carrying across the marble-floored showroom as sales associates and customers began to gather, drawn by the commotion and the unmistakable tone of mockery in his voice. His expensive Italian suit probably cost more than Thomas's car was worth, and he wore his wealth like armor, using it to shield himself from any sense of common decency or basic human respect. This gentleman clearly knows his way around an engine, don't you think? Look at him there, trying to figure out why his old beater finally gave up the ghost right here on my property. The laughter that followed was cruel and sharp, cutting through the pristine showroom like broken glass, and Thomas felt the weight of every eye upon him as he stood there beside his disabled vehicle, dignity intact, but patience wearing thin. The Porsche in question was a complete disaster, a 2020 model that had been utterly destroyed in what Wellington claimed was a high-speed accident involving the son of a business rival. The engine was blown, the chassis was bent beyond recognition. The electrical system was fried to the point where even the dashboard lights refused to illuminate, and the whole thing looked like it had been through a war zone rather than simply a traffic collision. Wellington kept it there as a trophy, a reminder of his legal victory when he successfully sued the young driver's family for damages and emotional distress, extracting a settlement that made headlines in the local business journals. 7 different mechanics have looked at this machine, Wellington continued, now pulling out his phone to record the scene for his social media followers, his grin wide and predatory as he framed Thomas in the shot. 7 experts, mind you, all with certifications and credentials and years of experience, and every single one of them said the same thing. This car is finished, done, completely beyond repair, a total loss that belongs in a scrapyard, not a showroom. Thomas slowly climbed out of his Chevrolet, his movements deliberate and unhurried, and his dark eyes swept across the crowd that had gathered to witness his humiliation. What they saw was an older black man in worn work clothes, someone they assumed knew nothing about luxury vehicles, someone they could dismiss without a second thought. What they couldn't see, what their prejudice and assumptions prevented them from recognizing, was the lifetime of experience and expertise that resided in those weathered hands and sharp mind. "Sir," Thomas said quietly, his voice steady despite the mockery surrounding him like a thick fog, "would you mind if I took a closer look at that Porsche?" Wellington nearly doubled over with laughter, actually clutching his sides as if Thomas had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Oh, by all means, please do. Take all the time you need. Maybe you'll discover something that 7 certified mechanics somehow missed. That would be quite the miracle, wouldn't it?" The sarcasm was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and the crowd ate it up, their phones now out and recording, already composing captions in their minds about the delusional old man who thought he could repair a supercar. As Thomas approached the wrecked Porsche, his entire demeanor shifted in a way that only the most observant would have noticed. His fingers traced the damaged bodywork with a gentleness that seemed out of place given the violence of the destruction, and for just a moment, something that looked like recognition flickered across his weathered face. He knelt down beside the engine compartment, peering into the mechanical carnage with eyes that had seen far more than anyone in that room could possibly imagine. What Marcus Wellington and his audience of privileged spectators didn't know What they couldn't have known, because they'd never bothered to ask or care, was that those calloused hands had spent 42 years working in places and on projects that would make their luxury car collection look like children's toys. While Wellington had inherited his father's real estate company and multiplied his wealth through aggressive business tactics and questionable ethics, Thomas Reed had devoted 4 decades of his life to a form of precision engineering that existed at the absolute cutting edge of automotive technology. You know what I find most entertaining about this whole situation? Wellington addressed his growing audience, his voice booming across the showroom as more people gathered to watch the spectacle unfold. The absolute confidence. Look at how he's examining every detail, as if he actually understands what he's looking at, as if those hands have ever touched anything more complicated than a lawnmower engine or maybe an old pickup truck transmission. The insults kept coming, wave after wave of condescension and prejudice, each comment designed to diminish and degrade, to turn a human being into entertainment for the afternoon. Thomas's daughter Maya had stepped out to pick up coffee and hadn't yet returned, which meant no one in that building knew their connection. No one understood that they were humiliating someone's father, someone's grandfather, someone deeply loved and respected by people who actually mattered. The cruelty was pure and unfiltered, untempered by any sense of social consequence or basic human decency. 30 minutes passed, then 45, then a full hour, and still Thomas remained focused on the Porsche, his examination methodical and thorough, completely ignoring the ongoing commentary and the phones recording his every move. Wellington had started a live stream on Instagram, broadcasting to his 150,000 followers, narrating the scene like it was a sporting event. We're now at the 1 hour mark, folks, and our amateur mechanic here is still at it, still believing in miracles, still convinced he's going to accomplish what trained professionals couldn't. But something was beginning to change in the atmosphere, a subtle shift that the more perceptive observers were starting to notice. Thomas's movements weren't random or exploratory. They were precise, confident, purposeful, the movements of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and exactly where to find it. These weren't the uncertain gestures of someone guessing their way through an unfamiliar machine. These were the assured actions of someone who understood the language of engines and metal and precision engineering at a fundamental level. "Hey, old-timer," shouted Derek, one of Wellington's top salesmen, emboldened by his boss's example and the laughter of the crowd. "My uncle runs an auto parts store out in the suburbs. I could probably get you a job stocking shelves if this mechanic thing doesn't work out for you. Might be more your speed, you know." The joke landed exactly as intended, generating another round of cruel laughter from the assembled crowd. But Thomas didn't even glance up from his work. At 68 years old, he had learned a long time ago that dignity wasn't found in the words you spoke in response to cruelty, but in the quality of the work you did and the integrity you maintained when others abandoned theirs. His hands continued their careful exploration of the Porsche's destroyed engine, and with each passing minute, with each component he examined and each connection he traced, he was building a picture in his mind, not just of what had happened to this car, but of why it had happened, and most importantly, of who had made it happen. What none of these people could possibly understand, what their prejudice and assumptions prevented them from seeing, was that Thomas Reed had spent his entire professional life working on automotive projects that existed at the absolute pinnacle of engineering achievement. While Marcus Wellington was learning how to manipulate real estate contracts and exploit legal loopholes, Thomas was spending 42 years as the lead development engineer for Porsche's racing division in Stuttgart, Germany, responsible for creating and perfecting the engines that powered their most advanced motorsport vehicles. He had designed power plants that won championships, broken speed records, and pushed the boundaries of what was mechanically possible. His name appeared on patents, his innovations had been studied by engineering students around the world, and his retirement party had been attended by some of the most respected names in automotive engineering. But here, in this moment, covered in grease and surrounded by mockery, none of that mattered to anyone watching. They saw only what they wanted to see, what their prejudice told them they should see, and they never once considered that they might be making the biggest mistake of their lives. The humiliation that Marcus Wellington had planned as a quick afternoon diversion was now stretching into its second hour, and far from growing tired of the entertainment, the crowd seemed energized by it. More customers had wandered in from the parking lot, drawn by the commotion and the promise of free amusement at someone else's expense. Wellington's Instagram livestream had attracted over 2,000 viewers, with comments flooding in, some expressing discomfort at what they were witnessing, but many more joining in the mockery with their own cruel jokes and observations. I have to say, the persistence is almost admirable, Wellington narrated into his phone, pacing around Thomas like a predator circling wounded prey. Most people would have given up by now, would have admitted defeat and slunk away in embarrassment, but not this gentleman. He's committed to the bit, I'll give him that much. Still examining every wire, every bolt, every piece of this destroyed engine like he's going to find some magic solution that 7 professional mechanics somehow overlooked. Thomas had now removed several panels from the engine compartment, laying them out in a careful sequence on the showroom floor, his movements still deliberate and methodical. Derek, the salesman who'd made the earlier joke, whispered loudly to a colleague. Does he even know what he's looking at? I mean, seriously, this is getting sad at this point. Someone should probably stop him before he hurts himself on all that twisted metal. But there was something in the way Thomas worked that was beginning to make a few people uncomfortable, a precision and confidence that didn't match the narrative Wellington was spinning. His hands moved without hesitation, reaching for specific components, checking particular connections, following a logical path through the mechanical chaos that suggested deep familiarity rather than confused exploration. One customer, a younger man named James who actually knew something about cars, leaned over to his friend and whispered, "Those aren't random movements. He's checking very specific failure points in a very specific order. That's not guesswork. That's systematic diagnostics." Maya Reed pushed through the glass doors of Wellington Premium Automotive, carrying a cardboard tray with 2 coffee cups, her smile fading instantly when she saw the crowd gathered in the middle of the showroom floor. Her heart dropped into her stomach when she recognized her father at the center of the commotion, kneeling beside a wrecked Porsche while Marcus Wellington stood over him with a phone. Recording and narrating like this was all some kind of sick reality show. She'd worked in the accounting department for 3 years, keeping her head down, doing her job well, and carefully avoiding Wellington's attention because she'd seen how he treated people he considered beneath him. Maya had heard the stories about his casual cruelty, his tendency to humiliate staff members in front of others, his belief that wealth gave him the right to treat people however he wanted. Now her own father was on the receiving end of that cruelty, and every protective instinct in her body screamed at her to intervene, but she hesitated, knowing that revealing their relationship might cost her the job she needed to support her own young daughter. "Ah, we have a newcomer," Wellington announced, noticing Maya's arrival but not recognizing her as an employee since she normally worked upstairs and away from the showroom floor. "Come join us, miss. You're witnessing something truly special here. A masterclass in optimism over expertise, determination over common sense. This gentleman has been trying to repair this totaled Porsche for almost 2 hours now." Maya's hands trembled as she held the coffee cups, torn between rushing to her father's defense and protecting her livelihood, between family loyalty and financial necessity. She watched Thomas work, saw the careful way he examined each component, and recognized in his movements the same focused intensity he brought to every challenge he'd ever faced throughout her life. Her father had taught her everything about resilience, about maintaining dignity in the face of disrespect, about the quiet strength that comes from knowing your own worth regardless of what others think or say. And now she was watching him apply those same principles in real time, refusing to be provoked, refusing to be hurried, simply continuing his work with the same methodical precision he'd always demonstrated. Thomas finally spoke again, his voice cutting through the ongoing commentary with unexpected clarity and authority. "Mr. Wellington," he said, still not looking up from the engine, "I need to ask you something important. This car, the accident that destroyed it, was it investigated by the insurance company's independent examiner, or did they rely solely on the police report?" The question caught Wellington off guard, disrupting his smooth flow of mockery for the first time since this whole spectacle began. What? Why would that matter? Of course it was investigated. Everything was thoroughly documented and processed. What's your point? Thomas carefully removed a specific component from deep within the engine compartment, holding it up to the light for careful examination. His expression neutral, but his eyes sharp with focus. Because this engine wasn't destroyed in any accident, Mr. Wellington. This damage was caused deliberately, systematically, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how to make it look like collision damage to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for the signs. The word deliberately sent a ripple of murmuring through the crowd, a shift in energy from mocking entertainment to genuine curiosity. Wellington's confident smile faltered for just a moment before he forced it back into place. But that momentary crack was enough to reveal the nervousness underneath. That's ridiculous. You're making things up now, creating conspiracy theories to distract from the fact that you can't fix this car. The accident was witnessed by multiple people, documented by police, investigated by insurance professionals. You're just embarrassing yourself with these wild accusations. But Thomas was already pointing to specific components, his voice gaining strength as he explained what he was seeing. This coolant line was cut with precision tools, then exposed to high heat to create burn marks that would suggest engine fire. These mounting bolts were deliberately over-torqued until the threads stripped, then loosened again to make it look like vibration damage from impact. And this wiring harness wasn't torn by collision force. Look at the edges, perfectly clean cuts made with wire strippers, then frayed by hand to simulate accident damage. This wasn't destruction, Mr. Wellington. This was sabotage, careful and calculated, designed to maximize the insurance payout. The showroom had gone almost completely silent now, the mockery replaced by an uncomfortable tension as people leaned in to see what Thomas was pointing to. Even on Wellington's phone screen, his Instagram viewers were flooding the comments with questions and observations, the tone shifting from cruel jokes to genuine interest in what was being revealed. Derek, the salesman, stepped closer to examine the components Thomas was indicating, and his face went pale as he recognized the truth in what was being explained. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Those cuts are way too clean. Those aren't accident damage." Wellington's face had drained of color now, his expensive suit suddenly seeming less like armor and more like a costume, his carefully constructed image beginning to crack under the weight of Thomas's calm, methodical deconstruction of his lies. "You can't prove any of this. You're just making assumptions based on superficial observations. Anyone can point at damaged parts and spin a story." Thomas stood up slowly, his knees protesting the long period of kneeling, but his posture still straight and proud, and he looked Marcus Wellington directly in the eye for the first time since this whole ordeal began. "Sir, I've spent 42 years of my life working with engines exactly like this one. I know their language, their signatures, their patterns of failure. And I know the difference between honest destruction and deliberate sabotage." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. "But you're right, that proof matters. So let me ask you this. Would you like me to call the engineer who designed this specific engine variant? Because I happen to have his personal number, and I think he'd be very interested to hear about what I've found here." Wellington tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out strangled and weak. "You expect us to believe you have the personal phone number of Porsche engineering staff? This is getting more absurd by the minute." Thomas pulled his phone from his pocket with hands that were steady despite the grease covering them, and he scrolled through his contacts with the practiced ease of someone who'd made this particular call many times before. His name is Klaus Hoffmann. He's currently the director of motorsport engineering at Porsche AG in Stuttgart, Germany. We worked together for 23 years before I retired and moved back to the States to be closer to my family. Would you like me to put him on speaker? The crowd pressed closer now, phone still recording, but the energy completely transformed from mockery to anticipation. Maya had moved to the front of the gathered observers, her coffee cups forgotten on a nearby desk, tears streaming down her face as she watched her father calmly dismantle the web of lies and cruelty that had been spun around him. Wellington opened his mouth to object, to stop what was about to happen, but Thomas was already pressing the call button, and the sound of the international ringtone echoed through the suddenly silent showroom with the weight of impending judgment. The call connected, and a voice with a thick German accent came through crystal clear on speaker mode. Thomas, mein Freund, it's been too long since we've spoken. How are you enjoying retirement in America? Klaus Hoffmann's warm greeting contrasted sharply with the cold tension that now gripped the showroom. Klaus, I'm well, thank you, but I need your expertise on something urgent. I'm standing in front of a 2020 Porsche 911 GT3 with serial number. Thomas rattled off a long string of numbers and letters from a plate he'd uncovered in the engine compartment, and I'm seeing damage patterns that concern me greatly. The owner claims it was destroyed in a high-speed collision, but the mechanical evidence tells a very different story. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the sound of typing on a keyboard, and then Klaus's voice came back with a new tone, sharp, professional, deeply concerned. Thomas, I have that vehicle's complete history in our database now. That particular engine was part of our limited GT3 RS development series. It has multiple redundant safety systems that I know you personally consulted on during the design phase. That engine cannot fail in the way being described unless those safety systems were deliberately bypassed or disabled. Think about a time when someone judged you without knowing your story. Did you speak up, or did you let your actions do the talking? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how you've handled moments like this. The revelation hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated silently, but with devastating impact. And Marcus Wellington's face had transformed from confident mockery to something approaching genuine terror. Klaus Hoffmann continued speaking from the phone, his German accent thick, but his English perfect, honed by decades of international collaboration. Thomas, this is very serious. If someone deliberately damaged one of our development engines and then filed fraudulent insurance claims, this becomes a matter for both German and American authorities. We take intellectual property violations extremely seriously, and our engines contain proprietary technology worth millions in research investment. Wellington tried to interrupt, stepping forward with his hands raised as if he could somehow physically stop the words coming from the phone. But Thomas simply turned slightly away, keeping the device out of reach while Klaus continued his analysis. The serial number you provided shows this vehicle was sold through our exclusive dealer network with full documentation and a comprehensive warranty package that specifically covers all mechanical failures except those caused by deliberate misuse or racing modifications performed outside authorized facilities. Klaus explained, his voice taking on the measured tone of someone who had testified in court cases before. If this engine was sabotaged and presented as accident damage to collect insurance money, that would constitute fraud on multiple levels. Insurance fraud, obviously, but also fraud against Porsche AG, since our warranty department would have flagged these damage patterns immediately if we'd been properly consulted during the claims process. Thomas, do you have photographs of what you're seeing? Can you document the specific components showing deliberate damage? Thomas nodded even though Klaus couldn't see him, already snapping detailed photos with his phone, capturing close-up images of the cut coolant lines, the stripped bolt threads, the precisely severed wiring harnesses, all the evidence that told the story of calculated destruction rather than accidental collision. Maya had finally pushed through to the front of the crowd, no longer caring about her job or the consequences of revealing her connection to Thomas, and she stood beside her father with tears streaming down her face. Not tears of shame or embarrassment, but tears of fierce pride and vindication. That's my father, she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, her voice shaking with emotion but strong with conviction. Thomas Reed, lead development engineer for Porsche Motorsport Division, Stuttgart, Germany, retired after 42 years of service. He holds 17 patents related to high-performance engine design, 3 Engineering Excellence Award from the German Automotive Association, and he trained over 100 engineers who are now working in top positions throughout the global automotive industry. And you've spent the last 2 hours humiliating him for your entertainment. The crowd shifted uncomfortably now. Phone still recording, but the context completely transformed. People suddenly realizing they were no longer watching harmless entertainment, but documented evidence of something much darker and more shameful. Wellington's carefully constructed world was collapsing around him with the speed and inevitability of a controlled demolition. Each new piece of information removing another support beam from the foundation of lies he'd built his image upon. "Klaus," Thomas said into the phone, his voice still calm despite the emotional weight of the moment. "I'm going to send you these photographs along with a detailed technical report on what I've found here. Based on my analysis, this engine was deliberately destroyed using a very specific methodology that required insider knowledge of the vehicle's systems and vulnerabilities. The sabotage was sophisticated enough to fool standard insurance inspectors, but crude enough that anyone with deep knowledge of these engines would immediately recognize it as intentional." Klaus made a sound of disgust on the other end of the line. "This is precisely the kind of insurance fraud that costs our industry billions every year and drives up premiums for honest customers. Thomas, I'm going to need you to preserve that evidence and expect a call from our legal department within the hour. We'll also be notifying the insurance company that handled the original claim, and I suspect they'll be very interested in recovering whatever settlement money was paid out based on fraudulent damage assessment." Derek, the salesman who'd been so quick to join in the mockery earlier, had gone pale and was slowly backing away from the scene, as if physical distance could somehow absolve him of his participation in what was now clearly a massive mistake. Other members of Wellington's staff were exchanging nervous glances, suddenly realizing that their casual cruelty had been captured on multiple phones and was already being shared across social media platforms, their faces and voices now permanently associated with this moment of collective shame. Wellington himself seemed frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to formulate words that could possibly salvage the situation. His Instagram live stream was still running, the viewer count now over 5,000 people, comments flooding in faster than anyone could read them, some expressing shock and outrage at the fraud being revealed, others demanding justice, many more simply pointing out the cruel irony of someone who'd spent hours mocking an innocent man now being exposed as a criminal himself. "Mr. Wellington," Thomas said quietly, ending the call with Klaus after promising to send the photographs immediately. "I need to ask you a direct question, and I strongly suggest you think carefully before answering, because whatever you say now is being recorded by at least a dozen people and will certainly be used in legal proceedings. Did you deliberately destroy this Porsche yourself? Or did you pay someone else to do it for you, so you could collect the insurance money?" The question landed like a physical blow, and Wellington actually staggered backward a step, his expensive shoes sliding slightly on the polished marble floor. "I don't have to answer that. I don't have to answer any of your questions. This is harassment. This is slander. I'm going to call my lawyers and have you arrested for trespassing and making false accusations against a respected member of the business community." But his voice lacked any real conviction, the bluster ringing hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence and expert testimony. Maya stepped forward now, her accounting background suddenly very relevant to the conversation unfolding. "Mr. Wellington, I handle the financial records for this dealership, including all insurance claims and settlements. Over the past 4 years, I processed 7 different claims for vehicles that were supposedly totaled in accidents or mechanical failures, each one resulting in substantial insurance payouts that were then recorded as miscellaneous income in the company's books rather than being properly documented as insurance settlements. At the time, I assumed it was just sloppy bookkeeping, but now I'm wondering if there might be a pattern worth investigating." Wellington's face went from pale to ashen, his carefully constructed empire of wealth and reputation crumbling with the accelerating force of an avalanche. You don't have the authority to access those records without my permission. That's confidential company information, and sharing it without authorization is grounds for immediate termination and possible legal action." Maya smiled, and there was steel in that smile, the strength of someone who'd finally had enough of watching bullies operate without consequences. "Actually, Mr. Wellington, as part of my employment contract, I'm required by law to report any suspicious financial patterns that might indicate fraud or money laundering. And given what my father has just discovered about this Porsche, I think those 7 insurance claims definitely qualify as suspicious patterns worth reporting to the appropriate authorities. I'll be contacting our accounting oversight board first thing tomorrow morning, along with the State Insurance Fraud Investigation Division, and I'll be providing them with complete documentation of every claim that's raised concerns. The threat wasn't empty or idle. It was a promise backed by documentation, evidence, and professional obligation, and Wellington knew it. His face twisted with rage and fear in equal measure, the mask of civilized superiority finally slipping away completely to reveal the desperate, grasping nature underneath. James, the young customer who'd earlier noticed Thomas's systematic approach to examining the engine, stepped forward with his phone held high. "Mr. Wellington, I want you to know that I've been streaming this entire encounter to my automotive enthusiast forum, which has about 30,000 active members. They've been watching everything. Every insult you threw at Mr. Reed, every laugh at his expense, and now all of this fraud evidence being revealed. Several people have already said they're forwarding the footage to local news stations and posting it on their own social media accounts. By tomorrow morning, this is going to be everywhere, and your name is going to be permanently associated with both insurance fraud and the public humiliation of a respected automotive engineer. I hope whatever money you stole was worth destroying your reputation completely." The young man's voice shook slightly. Whether from anger or excitement, it was hard to tell. But his message was clear. There would be no controlling this narrative, no buying silence, no making this go away through intimidation or legal threats. Thomas knelt back down beside the Porsche, his examination now focused not on diagnosis, but on documentation, carefully photographing every piece of evidence from multiple angles, making sure each image was clear and well lit and would stand up to legal scrutiny. "Mr. Wellington," he said without looking up from his work, "in 42 years of engineering, I've learned that every system has integrity points, places where honesty and dishonesty reveal themselves clearly to anyone who knows how to look. Engines don't lie. Metal doesn't lie. Physics doesn't lie. Only people lie, and they usually do it because they think they're smart enough to get away with it, clever enough that nobody will ever look close enough to see the truth. But the truth always leaves traces, always leaves evidence, always leaves signs for those patient enough and skilled enough to find them. You thought this engine was just a pile of destroyed metal, a trophy you could keep in your showroom to remind yourself how clever you'd been. What you didn't realize is that you were keeping evidence of your crime on public display, just waiting for someone with the right knowledge to come along and read the story written in twisted metal and cut wires. The sound of sirens in the distance made everyone freeze, and Wellington's eyes went wide with panic. Who called the police? Nobody had any right to involve law enforcement in a private business matter. But Maya held up her own phone, her expression calm despite the trembling in her hands. "I did, Mr. Wellington. About 20 minutes ago, when it became clear that we were witnessing evidence of insurance fraud being discussed. The dispatcher said they'd send both regular officers and someone from their fraud investigation unit. They should be arriving any moment now." And indeed, through the glass walls of the showroom, 3 police cruisers could be seen pulling into the parking lot, their lights flashing, but sirens now silent as they approached the building. Thomas stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that someone had thoughtfully provided, his expression peaceful despite everything that had happened, everything that was still unfolding around him. Detective Sarah Martinez stepped through the doors of Wellington Premium Automotive with the practiced eye of someone who'd worked fraud cases for 15 years and could smell a con from a mile away. She was accompanied by 2 uniformed officers and another detective carrying what looked like evidence collection equipment, their arrival transforming the showroom from a place of business into something resembling a crime scene. The crowd of customers and staff who'd been so eager to film Thomas's humiliation now looked uncertain about their continued presence, several people edging toward exits as if they suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. "I'm Detective Martinez, Financial Crimes Division," she announced, her badge held high enough for everyone to see clearly. "I received a call about possible insurance fraud being discovered on these premises. Who can fill me in on what's happening here?" Maya stepped forward, her accounting credentials suddenly very relevant, and began explaining the situation with professional clarity. Her father's examination of the wrecked Porsche, the evidence of deliberate sabotage, the conversation with Klaus Hoffmann in Germany, and her own concerns about the pattern of suspicious insurance claims she'd processed over the past 4 years. Marcus Wellington tried to interject multiple times, his voice rising with each attempt to regain control of the situation. "This is absurd. This is harassment. These people have invaded my business, damaged my property, made wild accusations without any real evidence. And now they're trying to destroy my reputation with these conspiracy theories." But Detective Martinez held up one hand, silencing him with a gesture that carried the weight of legal authority. "Mr. Wellington, I'd advise you to stop talking right now and consider whether you want to request legal representation before we continue this conversation. Based on what I'm hearing, there are some serious questions that need answering, and anything you say at this point can and will be documented as part of our investigation." She turned to Thomas, her expression professional but not unkind. "Sir, I understand you're the one who identified the potential fraud. Can you walk me through exactly what you found and explain your qualifications to make these assessments?" Thomas did exactly that, his explanation clear and methodical, pointing out each piece of evidence while Detective Martinez took notes and the other detective photographed everything from multiple angles. The cut coolant lines, the stripped bolts, the severed wiring harnesses. Each piece of evidence was documented, tagged, and carefully preserved according to proper investigative procedures. "And you're saying you designed engines like this one?" Detective Martinez asked, not skeptically, but seeking confirmation. "Can you provide documentation of your employment history and credentials?" Thomas pulled up his phone, showing her his LinkedIn profile, which listed his entire career history, complete with recommendations from colleagues and supervisors, links to patents he'd filed, photographs from industry conferences where he delivered keynote speeches. "I can provide whatever verification you need, Detective. I have employment records, retirement documents, professional certifications, all of it properly documented and easily confirmed through Porsche's corporate offices." Klaus Hoffmann, still following the situation through text messages with Thomas, had already sent an official letter from Porsche AG confirming Thomas's employment history and expertise, vouching for his technical assessments, and formally requesting that all evidence be preserved for their own investigation into potential intellectual property violations. Detective Martinez read the email on Thomas's phone, her eyebrows rising slightly as she absorbed the implications of having a major German automotive manufacturer's legal department getting involved in what had started as a local fraud case. "Mr. Wellington," she said, turning back to the dealership owner who was now visibly sweating despite the showroom's aggressive air conditioning. "I'm going to need you to provide documentation of the original insurance claim for this vehicle, including all assessments, repair estimates, and settlement agreements. I'm also going to need access to your business financial records for the past 5 years, specifically all insurance claims and payouts. You can either provide these voluntarily, or I can return with a warrant, but either way, we'll be examining those records thoroughly." Wellington's face had gone through several shades of pale and was now settling somewhere near gray, his expensive suit looking rumpled despite its perfect tailoring, his carefully styled hair beginning to show sweat at the temples. "I want my lawyer present before I answer any questions or provide any documents. This has gone far beyond reasonable inquiry and has become what I can only describe as a witch hunt based on the wild speculation of someone with a personal grudge." But Detective Martinez wasn't having it, her expression hardening as she responded. "Mr. Wellington, nobody here has expressed any personal grudge. What I'm seeing is physical evidence of possible fraud, expert testimony from a qualified professional, supporting documentation from the manufacturer, and concerning financial patterns identified by your own accounting staff. This isn't speculation. This is the beginning of a legitimate criminal investigation, and your cooperation or lack thereof will be noted in my report." She pulled out her phone and made a quick call, speaking in low tones for a moment before hanging up and addressing the room again. "I have a warrant being prepared right now for your financial records and all documents related to insurance claims filed by this dealership. It should be ready within the hour." The atmosphere in the showroom had transformed completely from the mocking circus of 2 hours earlier to something heavy and consequential, the weight of serious legal trouble pressing down on everyone present. Derek, the salesman who'd been so quick with cruel jokes earlier, was now standing as far from Wellington as possible, clearly trying to distance himself from whatever was about to unfold. Other staff members were huddled in small groups, whispering nervously about their jobs, their culpability, their futures at a dealership that might not exist much longer. The customers who'd been filming for entertainment purposes were now realizing they were witnesses to a crime being uncovered, their casual cruelty captured forever in footage that would likely be used in court proceedings. Maya stood beside her father, her hand on his arm, tears still wet on her face, but her expression fierce with pride and vindication. She'd watched her father endure 2 hours of public humiliation with quiet dignity, never lashing out, never losing his temper, simply continuing his work with the same focused excellence he'd brought to every challenge throughout his life. Thomas himself seemed almost serene despite everything happening around him, as if the chaos and consequences swirling through the showroom were simply the natural result of truth finally emerging from beneath layers of lies and arrogance. "Detective Martinez," he said quietly, "I want to make something clear. I didn't come here looking for any of this. I just came to bring lunch to my daughter, and my car broke down in an unfortunate moment. Everything that's happened since then has been the result of Mr. Wellington's choices, not mine. I would have been perfectly happy to call a tow truck, collect my daughter, and go home. But when he challenged me to examine this Porsche, when he turned my presence here into a spectacle for his entertainment, he also gave me the opportunity to see something that needed to be seen, to recognize something that needed to be recognized. I take no pleasure in any of this, Detective. I'm just grateful that the truth came out before more people were hurt by whatever scheme was operating here." Detective Martinez nodded, her respect for Thomas evident in her expression and her tone. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate your cooperation and your professionalism throughout what I can only imagine has been a very difficult afternoon. I'm going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement, and we'll need detailed, written documentation of your findings to accompany the physical evidence we're collecting here. Will you be available for that?" Thomas agreed immediately, his willingness to participate in the investigation standing in stark contrast to Wellington's defensive hostility. The detective then turned to address the crowd that still lingered in the showroom, her voice carrying authority that demanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is now an active crime scene for the purposes of evidence collection. I'm going to need everyone who doesn't work here to clear the premises immediately. If you are filming or photographing any part of today's events, please provide your contact information to Officer Reynolds over there so we can follow up if needed. Your footage may become important evidence." As people began filing out, many of them looking ashamed now that the reality of their participation in collective cruelty was sinking in, James approached Thomas with an outstretched hand. "Mr. Reed, I just want to apologize for not speaking up sooner when I realized you knew what you were doing. I should have said something, should have questioned what was happening instead of just watching and recording. What was done to you today was wrong, and I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to interrupt it." Thomas shook the young man's hand warmly, his grip firm despite his age and the long afternoon of kneeling and working. "Son, recognizing wrong when you see it is the first step. Actually doing something about it is harder, but you did do something, you documented what happened, you shared it with people who could amplify the truth, and you spoke up when it mattered. That takes more courage than most people ever manage. Don't beat yourself up for not being perfect. Just commit to being better tomorrow than you were today, and you'll turn out just fine." The young man's eyes filled with tears at the grace and forgiveness in Thomas's words, and he nodded several times before leaving the showroom, his posture straighter than when he'd arrived, as if Thomas's kindness had somehow realigned something that had been crooked inside him. Maya watched the exchange with fresh tears streaming down her face, seeing in that moment everything she loved and admired about her father. His refusal to let bitterness take root, his ability to find teaching moments even in cruelty, his fundamental belief that people were capable of growth and redemption if given the chance. "Dad," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I should have spoken up immediately, Should have told everyone who you were. Should have stopped it before it went so far." Thomas turned to his daughter and pulled her into a tight embrace, his calloused hands gentle on her back. "Baby girl, you did nothing wrong. You were protecting yourself and your livelihood, which is exactly what any father would want his child to do. I'm proud of you for speaking up when you did, for providing the evidence you had access to, for being brave enough to potentially sacrifice your job to do the right thing." Detective Martinez was now photographing the Porsche from every angle while her colleague carefully documented each piece of evidence Thomas had identified, placing markers beside the cut coolant lines, the stripped bolts, the severed wiring. Wellington stood off to the side with his arms crossed defensively, his lawyer now present and whispering urgently in his ear, clearly advising him to say nothing further without legal consultation. But the damage was already done. His words had been recorded by dozens of phones. His fraud had been exposed by an expert whose credentials were impeccable, and his pattern of suspicious insurance claims was now subject to official investigation. The empire he'd built through manipulation and deception was crumbling, and unlike the victims he'd exploited over the years, he would have no one to blame but himself. The uniformed officers were now clearing the building completely, asking all staff except essential personnel to leave for the day while the investigation continued. Rebecca Chun, one of the senior sales associates who'd remained silent during the entire spectacle, approached Detective Martinez with visible nervousness. "Detective, I think there's something you should know. About 8 months ago, Mr. Wellington asked me to prepare sales documentation for a vehicle that had supposedly been sold to a customer in Nevada, but when I processed the paperwork, something fell off about the whole transaction. The buyer's information seemed fake, the payment method was unusual, and when I tried to follow up to schedule delivery, all the contact information led to dead ends. I reported my concerns to Mr. Wellington at the time, but he told me to mind my own business and not ask questions about things that didn't concern me. At the time, I let it go because I needed this job, but now I'm wondering if that fake sale was connected to whatever fraud scheme was operating here." Detective Martinez immediately perked up at this information, pulling out her notebook and beginning to ask detailed questions about dates, vehicle identification numbers, supposed buyer information, and anything else Rebecca could remember. The implications were expanding beyond simple insurance fraud into potential money laundering, tax evasion, and organized criminal activity that could involve multiple states and federal jurisdiction. Wellington's lawyer looked increasingly distressed as the scope of potential charges grew with each new revelation, surely calculating in his head how many billable hours this case would require and whether his client would even be able to pay for adequate defense once all his assets were frozen pending investigation. Thomas watched all of this unfold with the same calm demeanor he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal, neither gloating nor celebrating, simply observing as truth continued to emerge from beneath layers of deception. "Detective," he said quietly when there was a break in the activity, "I need to go check on my car. My Chevrolet is still sitting in your driveway with whatever mechanical problem caused it to break down. Would it be possible for someone to help me push it out of the way so it's not blocking your entrance during all of this?" Detective Martinez smiled at this practical concern, so mundane compared to the drama unfolding inside the showroom. "Actually, Mr. Reed, I think that broken down car of yours is the luckiest mechanical failure in recent history. If it hadn't died right here, right now, this fraud might have continued for years, costing insurance companies millions and driving up premiums for honest people who'd never know why their rates kept increasing." She gestured to one of the uniformed officers. "Reynolds, help Mr. Reed with his vehicle. And Mr. Reed, after we're done at the station with your statement, I'd like to buy you dinner as a thank you for your cooperation and your expertise. Cases like this one, where we get an actual expert witness who stumbles into fraud purely by accident, those are rare, and they make our job so much easier. You've probably saved the department months of investigation time and thousands of dollars in expert consultation fees." Thomas accepted graciously, though he deflected the praise with characteristic humility. "I just looked at an engine, detective. The same way I've looked at thousands of engines over 42 years. The fraud revealed itself. I just happened to have the knowledge to recognize what I was seeing. As officers helped push Thomas's old Chevrolet to a parking spot where it wouldn't block emergency access, a tow truck arrived, not called by Thomas, but apparently summoned by James, the young customer who'd been so impressed by the revelation of truth. "Mr. Reed," James called out, jogging over from where he'd been waiting in the parking lot. "I called my uncle's towing service and asked him to come get your car as a thank you for what you did today. He's going to take it to his shop, diagnose the problem, and fix it free of charge." When I told him what happened here, what you exposed, he said any man with that much integrity and skill deserves to have his car running properly, and he'd consider it an honor to do the work. Thomas tried to protest, to insist on paying for the service, but James wouldn't hear of it. "Sir, you just saved countless people from being victimized by fraud. You endured hours of public humiliation with more grace than most people could manage, and you taught me something important about standing up for truth even when it's uncomfortable. Letting my uncle fix your car is literally the least anyone can do." Maya watched these exchanges with a heart so full it felt like it might burst, seeing her father recognized and honored by strangers who'd witnessed his character under fire and found it worthy of respect. She thought about all the times throughout her childhood when Thomas had taught her about dignity, integrity, and the importance of doing excellent work regardless of who was watching or whether anyone would ever appreciate it. Excellence is its own reward, he'd always told her. You don't do good work because people are watching. You do it because that's who you are, and nobody can take that away from you no matter what they say or how they treat you. Today, she'd watched those principles tested in the crucible of public mockery and deliberate cruelty, and she'd seen them emerge not just intact, but vindicated, proven true in the most dramatic way imaginable. Her father hadn't needed to defend himself with words, hadn't needed to announce his credentials or demand respect. He'd simply continued doing excellent work, and the truth had defended itself. 3 weeks after that transformative afternoon at Wellington Premium Automotive, Thomas Reed sat in a comfortable conference room at the offices of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Economic Crimes Division, surrounded by documents, photographs, and evidence that painted a picture far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. Special Agent David Morrison laid out timeline charts across the large table, each one documenting a separate instance of fraud that investigators had uncovered once they'd started pulling on the thread Thomas had exposed. "Mr. Reed, what started as a single insurance fraud case has evolved into a multi-state investigation involving 17 different vehicles, 8 insurance companies, and approximately $4.3 million in fraudulent claims over a 6-year period." Agent Morrison explained, his tone mixing professional detachment with genuine amazement at the scope of the scheme. "Your technical analysis of that Porsche was the key that unlocked everything. But the pattern we've discovered goes far beyond what anyone suspected that first day." Wellington's operation had been sophisticated and methodical, involving a network of corrupt mechanics who would deliberately sabotage luxury vehicles in ways that mimicked accident damage, insurance adjusters who'd been bribed to overlook evidence of tampering, and even some legitimate businesses that have been used to launder the fraudulent insurance payouts through fake sales and service transactions. The investigation had expanded to involve the FBI, state insurance fraud divisions, the Internal Revenue Service for tax evasion charges, and even international authorities, since some of the vehicles involved had been imported through questionable channels to avoid proper documentation. Marcus Wellington himself was currently in federal custody awaiting trial on charges that could result in 25 years in prison if convicted on all counts. His bail set impossibly high after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with access to hidden assets and offshore accounts. His luxury dealership had been seized as proceeds of criminal enterprise. His mansion was being auctioned to compensate victims, and his social media accounts, once used to broadcast his cruel entertainment, now served as evidence of his character and intent. But the ripple effects of that afternoon extended far beyond criminal justice proceedings and financial restitution. Maya Reed had been promoted to interim general manager when federal authorities took control of the dealership's operations pending its sale, her integrity and willingness to report suspicious activities making her the obvious choice to help stabilize the business and protect innocent employees who'd had no knowledge of Wellington's crimes. Under her management, the company culture had transformed completely. Gone were the casual cruelty, the mockery of customers deemed unworthy, the hierarchy based on wealth and appearance rather than character and competence. The dealership was now a place where excellence in service mattered more than expensive suits, where customers were treated with respect regardless of what they drove or wore, where employees were valued for their skills and integrity rather than their willingness to laugh at the boss's mean-spirited jokes. Sales had actually increased under Maya's management as word spread about the changed atmosphere. Customers appreciating the genuine service and honest dealing that replaced Wellington's predatory tactics. Derek, the salesman who'd been so quick to mock Thomas that afternoon, had undergone his own transformation. He'd sought out Thomas repeatedly over the following weeks, not just to apologize, but to learn, spending hours listening to stories about integrity, craftsmanship, and the importance of treating every person with dignity regardless of their circumstances. Mr. Reed, Derek had said during one of these conversations, his voice thick with emotion, I keep thinking about who I was that day, the things I said, the cruelty I participated in without even questioning it. I thought I was successful because I could sell expensive cars and make people laugh at my jokes. But I was really just a bully hiding behind a nice suit and a sales quota. You showed me something that day, not through words but through actions, about what it means to be a man of substance rather than just a man of appearances. Thomas had accepted Derek's remorse with his characteristic grace, even going so far as to write a letter of recommendation when Derek applied for a position at a different dealership known for ethical business practices, vouching for his growth and potential despite their difficult first meeting. The video footage from that day had indeed gone viral, spreading across social media platforms with millions of views, shares, and comments. But contrary to what Wellington might have feared before his arrest, the primary narrative wasn't about his public humiliation. It was about Thomas's dignity, his patience, his expertise revealed through quiet competence rather than loud boasting. The footage had been cut and shared in dozens of different versions, each one highlighting different aspects of the story. Some focused on the technical revelation of the fraud, others on the emotional reunion between Thomas and Maya, many on the broader lessons about prejudice, assumptions, and the importance of recognizing human worth beyond surface appearances. Thomas had been interviewed by local news stations, national morning shows, and even international media outlets interested in the intersection of social justice, corporate crime, and the viral nature of modern storytelling. Klaus Hoffmann had personally flown from Stuttgart to meet with Thomas again, bringing with him not just gratitude from Porsche AG for helping expose fraud that had damaged their brand reputation, but also a proposal. Thomas, my friend, Klaus had said over dinner at an upscale restaurant that felt worlds away from the showroom where everything had begun. We have been discussing in Stuttgart how to honor your career and your continued contribution to our industry. We would like to establish the Thomas Reed Engineering Ethics Fellowship, a program that would bring young engineers to Germany for intensive training, not just in technical skills, but in professional integrity, quality craftsmanship, and the responsibilities that come with designing machines that people trust with their lives. We want to teach the next generation not just how to build excellent engines, but how to be excellent human beings who happen to build engines. Would you be willing to serve as the program's founding director and help shape its curriculum? Thomas had been moved to tears by the offer, not because of the honor, though that certainly mattered, but because it represented exactly the kind of legacy he'd hoped to leave behind. Klaus, nothing would make me prouder than helping train young engineers who understand that technical excellence and moral character aren't separate things, but fundamentally connected. When you build something that people depend on, you're accepting responsibility for their safety, their trust, their lives. That's not just engineering. That's a sacred obligation, and I'd be honored to help teach that to the next generation. The fellowship program was announced with significant fanfare in the automotive industry press, with the first cohort of 10 young engineers from 5 different countries scheduled to begin their training in 6 months. Applications had poured in from around the world, young people inspired by Thomas's story and eager to learn from someone who embodied the principles they aspired to embrace. But perhaps the most significant impact of that day was felt closest to home, in the community where Thomas had lived quietly for the past decade since returning from Germany to be near his family. Young people from the neighborhood had started showing up at his garage in increasing numbers, drawn by the viral videos and the realization that this humble man who'd fixed their parents' cars for reasonable prices was actually a legendary figure in the automotive engineering world. Thomas welcomed them all, setting up what became an informal apprenticeship program where teenagers and young adults could learn not just about engines and mechanics, but about patience, precision, and the satisfaction that comes from mastering a craft through dedicated practice. His garage became a gathering place where excellence was celebrated, where mistakes were treated as learning opportunities rather than failures, where young people of all backgrounds could find mentorship and encouragement from someone who saw their potential rather than their limitations. Marcus Wellington, a young man who'd been named after the disgraced dealership owner by parents who'd once admired his apparent success, was among Thomas's most dedicated students. Mr. Reed, the 17-year-old, had said during his first visit to the garage, his voice shaking with a mixture of shame and hope, "I used to think success meant having money and power like the man I was named after. I used to think it was about being able to look down on other people and make them feel small so you could feel big. But watching what happened to him, watching how his whole empire collapsed because it was built on lies and cruelty, and then watching how you responded to everything with dignity and grace, that showed me what real success looks like. I want to learn from you. I want to build things that matter, create value that lasts, be someone that people respect because of my character, not my bank account." Thomas had taken the young man under his wing immediately, seeing in his earnest desire for guidance the possibility for genuine transformation. The Walter Johnson Scholarship Fund, no relation to the character from the original story, but a similar initiative inspired by Thomas's example, had been established by a group of retired engineers who'd followed the case and wanted to honor Thomas's commitment to education and opportunity. The fund provided full scholarships for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who demonstrated both aptitude for engineering and commitment to ethical practice, with preference given to applicants who could articulate not just what they wanted to build, but why it mattered and who it would serve. The first year had seen 20 full scholarships awarded, each one representing a young person whose life trajectory had been fundamentally altered by access to education that would have otherwise been financially impossible. Thomas served on the selection committee, reading application essays late into the night, moved to tears by stories of young people who understood that knowledge was a tool for service rather than just personal advancement. Maya often watched her father working with his young students and marveled at his energy and enthusiasm despite his age. "Dad," she'd said recently while visiting the garage on a Saturday afternoon, "you could be retired for real, you know, relaxing, traveling, enjoying your golden years without all this responsibility. Why do you keep taking on more students, more projects, more ways to serve other people?" Thomas had looked up from the engine he was teaching 3 teenagers to diagnose, his eyes twinkling with the joy that came from work that felt like purpose rather than obligation. "Baby girl, I spent 42 years building engines that help people go places, but these young people, they're not machines I'm building, they're lives I'm helping launch. Every one of them carries forward not just technical skills, but values, principles, ways of seeing the world and their place in it. That's not work, that's legacy, and it's the most important thing I'll ever do." Jonathan Blackwell, from the original story, existed only in that other narrative, but the lessons his character taught about prejudice, assumption, and the dangers of judging people by appearance rather than character, those lessons resonated in this reality too. Thomas received letters weekly from people around the world sharing their own stories of being underestimated, dismissed, or mocked because of their age, race, appearance, or circumstances. Many wrote about finding courage in his example to continue pursuing excellence despite facing prejudice, to maintain dignity in the face of disrespect, to trust that truth would eventually reveal itself if they remained committed to integrity. Thomas responded personally to as many letters as he could, especially those from young people struggling with discrimination or self-doubt, offering encouragement and reminding them that their worth wasn't determined by others' opinions, but by their own commitment to being people of character and competence. Rebecca Chun, the sales associate who'd provided crucial evidence about Wellington's suspicious transactions, had been promoted to sales director under Maya's management and had implemented training programs focused on ethical selling practices and customer respect. Mr. Reed changed everything for all of us, she'd said during a staff meeting. Not just by exposing the fraud, though that was certainly important, but by modeling a different way of being in the world. He showed us that you don't have to diminish others to elevate yourself. That real power comes from competence and character rather than cruelty and manipulation. That's the culture we're building here now. One where excellence matters more than appearances, where integrity is valued more than quarterly profits, where people are treated as human beings worthy of respect rather than marks to be exploited. The dealership was thriving under this new approach, regularly receiving recognition for customer satisfaction and employee retention, proving that ethical business practices weren't just morally superior, but actually more profitable in the long term. Special Agent Morrison had told Thomas during their final evidence review session that his case would be used as a training example in FBI courses on fraud investigation, particularly the importance of expert witnesses and the value of preserving evidence properly from the moment suspicions arise. Mr. Reed, the way you documented everything, the clarity of your technical explanations, the credibility you brought to the investigation. That's textbook perfect witness cooperation, and we'll be teaching future agents to hope for witnesses like you when they're working complex fraud cases. You didn't just help us catch one criminal. You helped us refine our investigative processes in ways that will benefit countless future cases. Thomas had been honored by this recognition, but remained humble about his role. Agent Morrison, I just looked at what was in front of me and reported what I saw. Any qualified engineer would have done the same thing. I just happened to be in the right place at the wrong time, or maybe the wrong place at the right time, depending on how you look at it. As Thomas sat in his garage on a quiet evening several months after that transformative day, surrounded by tools he'd collected over decades and young people who'd come to see him as mentor and guide, he reflected on the strange way life had unfolded. His car breaking down that particular afternoon, in that particular place at that particular moment. It had seemed like terrible luck at the time, an embarrassing inconvenience that turned into public humiliation. But looking back now, seeing all the lives that had been changed, the fraud that had been exposed, the young people who'd been inspired, the programs that had been created, the culture shifts that had occurred, it all felt less like random chance and more like purpose revealing itself through circumstances that had seemed negative at the time. Everything happens for a reason was a phrase Thomas had always been skeptical of, preferring to believe that people created meaning through their responses to circumstances rather than circumstances having inherent meaning. But if pressed, he might now admit that sometimes random events aligned in ways that allowed truth to emerge, justice to prevail, and good to triumph over cruelty, not through magic or divine intervention, but through the patient work of people committed to integrity even when facing mockery and contempt. If Thomas's story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity and truth matter more than appearances and cruelty, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who needs encouragement today. And please, tell me in the comments about people in your own life who've shown this kind of quiet strength, the teachers, parents, mentors, or even strangers who maintain their integrity when tested. Your stories matter, and this community grows stronger when we share them with each other. What would you like to see next? What story should we tell? This channel exists because people like you believe that character still matters in a world that too often celebrates the wrong things. Thank you for being here, for caring about these values, and for helping build a community that honors excellence, integrity, and human dignity above all else.